Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world tonight. This is Grant Cameron, and I'm going to do a new episode of the Stanton Friedman Files. I'm joined today by Nicole Sakich, who is in Illinois. Say hello, Nicole.
Hello, UFO people.
How are you doing?
I'm doing well tonight. How are you, Grant?
Super. And you're interested in nuts and bolts. You're interested in documents. And you have agreed, correct, to help me do some research on the Stanton Friedman Files?
Yes, happily agreed.
Yeah. So we have 6,000 pages, and we started to look through them. So tonight what we're going to do is we're going to go through a PowerPoint presentation. I'm going to take over the screen, and then we are going to look at some slides from some stuff that I've gathered together, and we will do a few episodes of this as we go along, and you'll join me, and we're just going to talk in the background, and we're going to look at some of the new stuff that I haven't talked about that I found last year at the Stanton Friedman collection. So here it is, and here you are with your glasses on, working hard, and you've got some of the files. I've given you a couple of days. I've photographed files at the New Brunswick Provincial Archives is where they are, and I stood there for 8 hours a day with a camera, and I photographed one after another. And you've got 2 of the days where you're going to go through these, all the photographs I took that day, and that would be a couple thousand photographs, and find the interesting documents, and we'll go through them. This is what the files look like. So you pull them out of your little file box and you put them down, and you just basically go flip, 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 and you photograph as fast as you can. And there's a lot of files there. There's, as I'll show you, there's 15 pallets of files, and they've only maybe processed a couple % of these files. The entire basement was full of files. Stan had done this for 61 years, so an awful lot. Did you ever meet Stan?
I never did, no.
Okay, have you, and you watched his material though? You've seen his lectures and stuff like that? Yeah.
Right. You can find, I think the latest count I saw on YouTube was there's 32 Stanton Friedman videos that people have shared and posted, and his various lectures or even just clips. It's great.
Yeah, and a lot of people think I really knew Stan well. I saw him many decades ago. He came to Winnipeg and filled the university. He gave a lecture there, and I remember being at that lecture. But I didn't really know Stan until a couple of months. Well, I knew him. I would talk, say, how you doing, and little chit chat or whatever. But I didn't really have a full sort of conversation with him till just before he died in January of last year. We were both in California, and we went out for breakfast together near the hotel. And then between some of the presentations, we were sitting there. There was a lunchtime break, and I sat with him there. We had a lot of conversations, but that was basically it. But now we have this chance to get inside the files, and you'll see some of the gold stuff that we found in the files. Nicole is also going to possibly work on the Barack Obama files. For people who don't know, the way the presidential files work is that the president leaves office, and he has 5 years in which to work on his files, to use files, to write memoirs and books and stuff like that. And at the end of 5 years, the files become open to the public. It's law, and what happens is that FOIAs can be filed. So Nicole and I will be filing our FOIA on the very first morning, like at 12 midnight. Ours will go in, and it's first come, first serve. So we intend to get our presidential UFO files, and they're going to have to process this material, which is what the Clintons did. 11 of the first 17 FOIAs that they did at the Clinton Library were UFO material. And of course, that made the Associated Press and Fox News and Washington Post and everybody wonder what's going on with all the UFO stuff. And I was getting phone calls from all the major media trying to find out, why is there so much UFO stuff? And it wasn't there was so much UFO stuff. It was just that I had filed before everybody else, and they were processing my material before they processed Hillary Clinton's material, which everybody wanted because she was running for president. And of course, they wanted to take her down and find gossip and stuff. So they were really angry that the UFO stuff was coming out before the Hillary Clinton stuff. It was actually a bunch of lawyers in Washington who made a complaint, and I actually wrote them a letter and told them where to go, and said, you guys think that you're so big because you're a bunch of powerful lawyers in Washington. If your Hillary Clinton requests were so important, you should have got in line like everybody else. And then I basically told them exactly where to go, and I never heard from them, but they were very upset the UFO stuff. And what's going to happen is, so the Obama administration is the first one where they're going to have it all online. This is their little thing that they put out on how it's going to work. And usually they would file get the paper material, but now we've gone to digital age, so the entire collection will sort of be online, and they'll still have the paper files for whatever reason you may need them, but basically it's going to be done online. But it'll be the same process that Nicole and I will file right away. We'll work on the questions as to what questions we want to know. So what you try to do is figure out who is involved, whose files do you want to see? Do you want to see photographs of these people with the president or whatever? Do you want the UFO files? You want the defense UFO files, the science advisors, president's UFO files? You just basically go through every little nook and cranny where you think they might be hiding the UFO files, and we'll file all this stuff, and they will process it first come, first serve. And then we will go together and we will put this material out to the public. They're talking about 250 terabytes of electronic records is what they're working on. So people often think at the Presidential Library that there's a big cover up, and I know the presidential archivists. I've worked with a number of them. I've been there, and these people are just historians. They're just extremely interested in this thing, and I maintain they're not covering up anything. They may have records that are classified that they can't release, but they're just as interested in trying to figure out what's going on as you and I are. And there's actually two incidents that I can sort of quickly mention. One was, if people seen, I discovered the Ronald Reagan made the famous speech about the alien invasion remark, and I was looking at the speeches to see how did this stuff get in the UFO speech? How did this UFO stuff get in? You know, what did people say when they saw it in the UFO speech? Because you get all the drafts of all the speeches, and that remark was actually taken out of the Ronald Reagan speech, and it was actually put back in. Reagan asked for his fantasy to be put back in the UN speech about the alien invasion. And so I was looking for President. I saw one thing in one of the documents, and this was 5 minutes before the archives closed for the day. And I said to the archivist, "Is this Ronald Reagan's handwriting?" She said, "No, that's not." She said, "This," and she went flip, 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 flip. She went through this file that I was working on, and she pointed to this, and she said, "That's Ronald Reagan's handwriting." And it was the alien invasion remark. She pointed to it. It was just synchronistic that she would point out and this was like 5 minutes. So I had to race to the photocopying machine and get this photocopied before I left. But I never would have found it if it hadn't been for an archivist. And the other example that I can give you is that at the Carter Library, there was a guy who went to school with Chip Carter, who was one of the archivists there, and he was very interested. He actually told me that the date that's usually used for Jimmy Carter's sighting is wrong. I think he believed it was 2 years before. It was as early as 1967, because he said Chip Carter had told him the story, and they were in high school, and he said they were in high school, they were out of high school in 67, so it had to be long before people thought the thing had taken place. So here was a guy who we talked to UFOs all the time while we were in there, and he actually sent me a document later on that he found where Jimmy Carter is talking to the Prime Minister of Grenada, and he finds the notes of that meeting with Jimmy Carter, and they're talking about paranormal phenomena, and they're talking about UFOs, and they're also talking about voodoo. And so this was the conversations that were in that, just Carter's handwritten notes for that meeting, just the point form thing. So these archivists are not really covering up. They're just as interested as you and I in getting history told. This is the library at the Clinton Library, and I've been there a couple of times, and I'm always the only person in there, and they have someone who sits there and watches you to make sure you don't steal files. And a couple of times the person fell asleep while they were sitting there watching me, because that's all they did was sit at the desk and make sure that You don't steal files. So what we're doing with the Stanton Friedman files, and this is what Nicole and I will be doing when we go through these 6,000 files, is you're looking for when people who are researchers will know that as you're researching, people will phone you up and they'll say, okay, you can't, I got some material for you, but you can't talk about it. Can you keep this confidential? And people make these little backdoor deals and they're going to keep this stuff secret. And people get all these backstories that never ever get released. So they die and then all this stuff is in the files. Same thing happens at the presidential library. So what I'm doing is I'm filing for different things, and what you're doing is you're just throwing darts and hoping you hit something with the dart. And one of the things I filed was because I knew that Lawrence Rockefeller, who was one of the Rockefeller brothers, he was the humanitarian guy who you know, had the stuff at the Teton ranches, and he was into animal rights, and he had the philosophy degree and stuff like that. And he was very much into UFOs, and he had hosted the Clintons and supposedly had done a UFO briefing. He had gone through trying to get the president to disclose UFOs in 1995 at the Rockefeller Ranch, which was in the Tetons in Wyoming. And I knew that Bill and Hillary had been there. So, of course, one of your FOIAs is, I want all the photographs of Bill Clinton at the Rockefeller Ranch in August of 1995. And then the next FOIA says, I want all the photographs of Hillary Clinton at the Rockefeller Ranch, 1995. Bill didn't show up anything, but there was maybe 100 photographs of Hillary Clinton at the ranch, and all you get is these little tiny snapshot things on a photograph piece of paper, and you've got to look at these things and hold them up and try to figure out which one is the photograph you want, because they're $16 a piece. It would cost you a fortune to get them all printed. So I saw a couple, and I got lucky with the one. This was a book that appeared that Rockefeller had given to Hillary. Hillary comes to the ranch, and what the photographs show is Hillary and Rockefeller coming from wherever, the helicopter or whatever, and they're walking through the ranch area and across this sort of a bridge. And Hillary has been given this book. So Rockefeller gives this book. She's got it upside down and backwards. She's holding this book. And that was one of the photographs I got. So this is an FOIA that I got. So when I saw this, I put out a request to people to try to help me figure out what is the book that Hillary Clinton is holding. What did Rockefeller give her? What was the book? And the other thing was this cross. You see these bizarre crosses that Hillary Clinton is wearing. Now, nobody ever figured out what the crosses were, but the book was figured out. It was done by a guy in France. He got all the books from 1994, 1995, looked at all the back covers of them, and he found them through the publishers and whatever, and found that this book was written by a professor, I think at the University of Arizona. I think his name was Davies, and it was called The Philosophical Implications of the Discovery of Extraterrestrial Life. And so this basically showed that, yes, Hillary Clinton had discussed UFOs and extraterrestrials with Lawrence Rockefeller when she was at the ranch. So that's what we're looking for when we go through the Stanton Friedman files, is we're looking for these kind of things that nobody's really thought to look for. They're hidden away in a file. Nobody has seen it. Stan knew it was there, but now Stan is gone, and it's up to us to find these little gems that are hidden in the files. Here's
Right.
two others that I found in the Clinton files, which Nicole has access to the Clinton files, and she has gone through some of the files, but we will do, right, Nicole, we're going to do some Clinton,
Yes.
we'll do some PowerPoints on the Clintons, and Nicole will go through some of the documents, find some of the interesting documents, and we'll put them in a PowerPoint and we'll go through them. These are the ones that I found. This is actually from an FOIA that I did before Clinton left office. And it shows you can get thousands of pages of material, and then you get two that are just absolute gems. This is Hillary Clinton. This is a document from a 2000 request from the science advisor to the President of the United States, whose name was Gibbons. And I'd heard that Bruce Maccabee had filed and got 500 pages of material. So what I did is I filed as well. I said, well, I'd like to get these documents because I'm the presidential guy. And I got 1,000. I got 1,000, and then there was about maybe, I can't remember how many. It was quite a few documents. When you check the index versus the documents I got, there was documents that were missing. So I filed an appeal, and I got more documents. So I was over 1,000 pages of documents. These are two of the gems that I got. This is a letter that is written from Henry Diamond, who is Lawrence Rockefeller's a lawyer. to Jack Gibbons, who was the science advisor to the President of the United States. And in the very first paragraph, and I didn't understand this for probably 15 years, what this line meant. And then it suddenly popped into my head what it was. And it said, attached are a draft letter to the President, which Lawrence has been discussing with Mrs. Clinton. So what Lawrence had done is he had a letter demanding UFO disclosure. And he was putting this letter around to various people to help edit the letter. And he would always threaten them. He'd say, okay, I think it's time to send a letter to the President. And they didn't want it to go because they knew this would become public, that Lawrence Rockefeller was demanding UFO disclosure. And so they'd say, no, Mr. Rockefeller, don't send the letter. What can we do for you? How can we help you? Please don't send the letter. And what you see in this document, it says that he has been discussing the draft letter with Mrs. Clinton and her staff. So one of the people who helped edit the letter to UFO disclosure to the President of the United States was Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton had an office in the West Wing of the White House, and she had the advantage that she wasn't part of the government. So what was happening is Lawrence Rockefeller was going through Hillary Clinton's office, and for 15 years I couldn't figure this out. Why would he go to Hillary's office? Why was he dealing with Hillary? And it was because Hillary was not in the government. He had plausible deniability. You cannot allow the president to be involved in the subject, which happened at the Rockefeller Ranch, that when Clinton went to the Rockefeller Ranch, according to the stories that were told, only Hillary sat in the briefing. When Lawrence gave his little spiel about UFOs and why we got to disclose this stuff, the president did not attend that briefing because the president cannot. He told Lawrence Rockefeller, this is like the tar baby story, the Arkansas tar baby story. And if you know this story, it's about the Brer Rabbit who sees the tar baby along the side of the road. The tar baby says hello, and the tar baby doesn't say anything because it's just basically a tar baby that somebody has stuck there like a little toy. And he gets angry and he punches the tar baby and he gets stuck to the tar baby. And then he gets angry and then he punches him with the other hand. He gets stuck there, and then he tries to use his feet to get his hands off the tar baby. And next thing you know, his hands and feet are balls stuck to the tar baby. And that's what President Clinton said to Lawrence Rockefeller, because he was from Arkansas. He said, this is like the Arkansas tar baby story. You cannot touch it, because once you touch it, you get stuck to it. So that they kept the president away from the story, and they made it look like Bill Clinton was a total idiot. He didn't know anything about UFOs. He was trying to find out what was going on, and that was the story they wanted. They wanted you to think that the president didn't know, but in fact, what they were doing is they're going through Hillary Clinton, and they were saying to Hillary Clinton, this is what we want. And then at night, Hillary would go to the president and say, Lawrence Rockefeller wants this, he's saying this. And it gave plausible deniability to the president. Nobody knew the president was actually in the background telling people what to do. It would go through Hillary Clinton's office. But I didn't know that for 15 years. And this document basically spells out the fact that the briefing document to the president, or the demand on UFO disclosure to the president, was edited by Hillary Clinton. And the other thing that sort of showed was that they wanted Hillary. The other threat that Lawrence Rockefeller was making was, he said, if I don't get what I want, I am going to put a full-page newspaper ad in every major newspaper in the United States. He was a billionaire, and they knew he could do it, and he was determined he was going to do it. And it basically said, Mr. President, what do you know? When did you learn it? When are you going to? Why didn't you tell the people? And when are you going to let the people know? And he was going to put this major thing in all these newspapers and identify that the president knows what's going on and he hasn't told people. And they didn't want that at all. So they would do whatever Lawrence wanted. And they would say to Lawrence, why, if you say it's as complex as you say it is, the cover up, and if it's as deep as you say it is, it's classified, there's no way we're going to get it all out on the table. We can't do it. We haven't got the resources to do it. Give us one case, and we will go after that one case, and then we'll go after the rest. And so Lawrence said, "Oh, okay, I want you to do Roswell," and that's why the U.S. Air Force went and did Roswell.
This is the same Rockefeller that was making the push in the 80s. This Clinton documents we're looking at now, this is 94 and 95. So when you're talking Rockefeller, I mean, he's at least been in this 2 decades, stirring the pot with these kind of threats. Like you said, he'll call up every newspaper, run an ad in every single one. Like,
yeah. And I remember talking to Bud Hopkins. I was at a meeting a table dinner with Bud Hopkins, and he was telling me the story that he and John Mack were at the Rockefeller estate in New York, and because that's where he lived, and so did Mack. And he said it was really weird. He said we were in this house, and Lawrence Rockefeller was bringing us breakfast. And he said it was just seemed so weird that this billionaire guy was delivering breakfast to our bedroom. And he said, and this was 92, so this is when he goes for the disclosure thing. He said in the 92 election, he said, whether Perot wins or George Bush wins or Clinton wins, I'm going to the president of the United States and I'm going to demand UFO disclosure. And Bud Hopkins said to me, he said, I said to Rockefeller, I said, well, Lawrence, I don't think that's how it works. And he said, I'm going to do it. I don't care. I'm doing it. I'm going in. I'm going to demand UFO disclosure. And that's what he did. So Clinton won the election, and he was there within a month, and he was demanding UFO disclosure. And they basically walked around him. He ended up doing this briefing in 95. And then Hillary, after the briefing the next morning, after he was at the ranch where he gives this spiel about UFO disclosure, she comes down, she says, okay, we've listened to you. Now don't ever bring up the subject again. So Hillary was the main person behind this thing. So we find these documents when you dig deep in these files that are really sort of revolutionary. This is the other one that was found in the files here. And this is Lawrence Rockefeller writing to Jack Gibbons. And it's in this one, he said, you indicated that you will keep the First Lady's office informed, and we shall as well. So everything that was happening from the science advisor was going through Hillary Clinton's office, and so was everything from Rockefeller going the other way. So Hillary was like the mailbox in between the two camps on this demand for UFO disclosure, and yet nobody knew until I filed this. The strange thing about this is I got the 1,000 pages of documents. Then when Clinton left office, after 5 years, I filed the FOIAs with the Clinton Library. And I, of course, now filed for the 1,000 pages of material from the Office of Science and Technology Policy, where I got these documents, the science advisor to the president. And the Clinton Library said, no, we got no files. And I said, well, yeah, you do have files. Yeah, I've got the files. And they said, nope, we don't have any files from the Office of Science and Technology UFO files. Maybe they're at the archives. So I went to the National Archives in Washington. I filed an FOIA there, and they said, nope, we got no files, no UFO files. And then I said, this is garbage. So I filed an appeal with the National Archives. Came back, nope, we've looked, there are no files. You've lost the appeal. And that's where it ended. So the 1,000 pages of files that I have, and I gave my copies to Steve Bassett and to Joe Bookman in Utah. They have my 2 sets of files. I don't have them anymore, but these files are no longer officially in the US government, but they are held in private hands. So wherever they went, whether they burned them or whatever they did with them, these files, according to the official policy, do not exist. But I have the 1,000 pages. So this is where the archives is. It's in Canada. It's on the far east coast of the country. It's got about 1 million people. It has a lot of 5G, but it has no COVID. It's famous. I think the second person just died yesterday in the province. They've got 1 million people, and they've only had 2 deaths. They've only got a few cases. Basically, they had almost no COVID in the province, and yet the archives is shut down. Now, as I was talking to Nicole a little while ago, this is kind of an emotional photograph. This is going from Toronto. So Stan would lecture all over the place, and if you saw his itinerary, he was doing sometimes 2 lectures a day. He'd be lecturing every day. His itinerary would be fly from this city to this city to this city, and he was just going all the time. But every time he would go back into Fredericton, New Brunswick, where he lived, he would go through Toronto. And this is the gate at Toronto to the flight that goes to Fredericton. So Stan would have taken this plane many times. So when I went to see the files, I actually flew on the plane that Stan would have flown off on a lot of times. And Stan actually died at this gate. He had his heart attack in the Toronto airport at the gate. And so this is where he left the world. And it was kind of an emotional thing to get on the plane and fly to Fredericton on a plane that Stan had probably taken 1,000 times.
Mm-hmm.
This is the provincial archives. It's not. I thought it was at the university archives. It's actually it's on the university campus, but it's actually the provincial archives, which does stuff like um, not driver's licenses, death certificates, marriage certificates, real estate stuff. That's what they do here. So the fact that they did the Stanton Friedman Files is a big stretch because this is not their stuff. And the archivist, Joanna, actually had to sort of pitch this thing. And they have, I think, 4 full-time archivists working on this. So you can imagine the amount of money, and the estimates are this could take 4 years to go through. So you got 4 archivists working for 4 years. They're putting an awful lot of money into this collection of material. So I give them full credit for doing this because this is not their stuff. And I asked them, "Are you putting this online?" And they say, "No, we're not putting this online. Why would you put on this? This is not our game. We're into real estate stuff and marriage certificates and stuff. They have some of that online." So that would be the thing that Nicole and our job is to give access to people to these files, to try to get these files online so people can access them, because it is actually 61 years of research that Stan had done full-time research on UFOs. This is my
that's the few people I have spoken with about going through these files. There's really no way to go in and hunt for something specific. You just kind of have to soak in what you have and try to organize it and see what names pop out at you. And that's what makes it kind of fun, is that so many people could get involved with this.
Yeah.
Just with the various levels of what you come across. So
yeah, and it's actually not even filed. She said, Stan, what did she use? He was more of a stacker than a filer. So basically, he had, I think, 13 filing cabinets or whatever, which they pulled those files, which I've seen some of those. But the vast majority of it was just stacked in huge piles. And it's like people that are like that, where they do that kind of stuff. They know exactly where everything is. They know where in the file the document is. But and what you got to remember is that the people who are doing the archives, who are going through these files, haven't got the foggiest notion of what a UFO is, or what a UFO document is, or who these people are. So they're going through one piece of paper at a time, and they're trying to put it into different stacks, and they're asking me, how do you want us to file this stuff? What's the best thing? All this kind of stuff. So I was giving them, look for these names. These are the certain topics like Roswell, Area 51, giving all these topics so that they know as they're going through how to sort this stuff out, because they have no idea about anything, and they're at a real disadvantage. So they're not going to know, and that's what people say, they're going to cover it up. They wouldn't know what to cover up. They have no idea what a UFO is. So there's no archives people are going to be covering up anything here. In fact, you'll see later on, I actually give them advice on some material where they have to put it into security. They don't really realize they're letting this stuff out that'll end up getting stolen. Fredericton is a beautiful place. I would like to live there. These are some of the houses there. Very, very classic sort of houses. And the house I stayed in was similar to this. They have a lot of bed and breakfast type houses there. Here's another one. It's a very, very beautiful place right on the Atlantic Ocean. And
this is relatively close to Shag Harbor, isn't it? Or the
Nova
area?
Scotia, yeah, it would be a few hours, but Nova Scotia would be next province over, and these are small provinces. So yeah, you could probably fly there in, I think I flew maybe 45-minute flight to get to the coast there where Shag Harbor happened. This is have you got this many files, Nicole?
No, not yet, not yet.
Not yet. He had 15 pallets. So you see one pallet there and a half of another pallet. There was 15 pallets of material. That's how much material Stan had. And so these poor archivists who don't know a UFO from a sausage are going to have to try to figure out how to sort this stuff and stuff like that.
With my recent move, I had 4 packing tubs of my current UFO stuff, books and files and notebooks, and I thought 4 was extreme, and then I saw these pallets.
Yeah, it's incredible, and now we've got it online, so you got access to the 6,000 pages, which I can do with one click of a mouse, where you can go on there. But The thing is, it has to be sort of sorted out because it's like 6,000 pages, and you have to
Mhm.
sort of put it into some sort of order so people don't have to read 6,000 pages to find what they're looking for. So there's a lot of material that we will be putting up. There'll probably be 10,000 pages added whenever the archive is open. But it's now, because of the COVID, even though they don't really have any people in hospital there, or they basically shut it completely down, they still have the restrictions. The archive is still closed, and so we're waiting for it. Probably won't be till the end of the year until they get the vaccine where they will allow it to open. But as soon as it's open, I'm going back, and I would probably add 10,000 pages to the 6,000 that are already there. And basically, that's what I say. What I do is I just go in and I just photograph. You have not got time to read anything. I'll tell anybody who's doing archives research, you take your cell phone camera, you photograph as fast as you can, and you read it when you get home. And so the Clinton files, which I've asked Nicole to help me with, I don't know how many pages, maybe 5,000 pages of UFO documents from the Clinton Library. I haven't even read yet. I have not even looked at them yet. And that's the thing is, you grab it and you take it home with you, but you haven't got time to sit and read material. Just photograph as fast as you can, and they will. Almost every archives will allow you to do that, as long as you don't wreck the documents or put them in the wrong boxes. You know, take out one box at a time. They have 100 rules, but as long as you know the rules, you can do it. This is the alien autopsy. This is you'll find a lot of like just articles and stuff. One of the articles that was in there was an article on the alien autopsy, which I got involved with last year with the alien autopsy document from the Edgar Mitchell files that we received and managed to sort of move it out into the public. The alien autopsy, Stan was involved in 1995 when it went public in Great Britain. He was no big fan of the alien autopsy. He thought it was all a big hoax, and he had a lot of files, but it'll be a matter of Nicole and I and other people putting all this stuff together in one file, because it's all sort of mixed in all sorts of different files. He may have 1 or 2 files on an autopsy, but I'll bet you he's got 1,000 pages of material on the alien autopsy from when he was there. He was involved with the people, did interviews with the people, but he was not a big fan of the alien autopsy. He thought it was a hoax. This is some of the FOIAs, which I've done a lot, and Stan did an awful lot of this FOIA material, because he was doing the same thing as me. He figured there was people who knew what was going on, and he was determined to use his legal rights to file, to try to force it out. This is one of the documents that I sort of highlighted. It's an FBI request, and the key thing with this, you'll see it's 1985. And if you know when Stan died, the first thing I did immediately is I filed for his FOIA, for his FBI file, because I knew that he and Bill Moore had filed their FOIA for their file. Anybody can file for their own file, their FBI file, to see whether the FBI's got anything on you, whether they're running investigations. They have to release it to you. So Stan was an American citizen living in Canada, but he filed, and so did Bill Moore. And Bill Moore, I know there was 61 pages, and there was only 5 pages that were released. So people say there's no UFO cover-up. Well, there is, because Bill Moore's 95% or 90% of his file was withheld in total, not one word, in total, national security secret. So, and I've actually filed again, and they said we couldn't find it, even though I sent them the front page of the FOIA. They said they couldn't find it. I filed an appeal and said, don't be stupid. I gave you, so I sent them the entire FOIA that Bill Moore got, which is about 6 or 7 pages of the file. I sent it back on an appeal, and I'm still waiting. It's been about a year, but I have that under appeal. I want to see what's in. I want them to release the other 55 pages of secret material, which has been withheld on national security grounds. And let's see what they've got, because everybody said Bill Moore was just hoaxing and doing whatever. It doesn't appear to be that from the FBI. So Stan filed in '85 for his FBI file, and basically they ended up opening a file on him. And we will maybe do that at another time in another document, a PowerPoint presentation, where the FBI opens up an investigation on him, and they want to know, why does he not have they didn't think he had a passport. Why is he getting his mail in the United States? And the reason was because he lived right on the border, and it was a lot cheaper to mail stuff out of the United States than to receive stuff in the United States. Yeah. So he was going across the border. And this is the letter that seemed to trigger an FBI investigation on Stan, where he's asking, and what happened was he was requesting very specific information from them on dates and stuff, and they couldn't figure out how did he know these dates. He had an inside source through Bill Moore, I guess, was identifying stuff inside the FBI and how to word the FOIA. So when they saw the FOIA, they realized that Stan was getting material from the inside, and they opened up this investigation on Stanton Friedman.
Well,
here's one. Go ahead.
You just discussed the interview you posted with Mr. Doty. You guys were discussing the FBI looking into Stanton over the passport issue and him traveling under 2 different names.
Yeah.
Which sounds nefarious, but it was really rather boring.
Yeah. You mentioned that I haven't listened to that interview since I never listened to it. I never listened to anything. So he mentioned he mentioned the 2 names. Did he mention the thing where, what was the other thing? Oh, about Stan being arrested. Was that in the interview I did with him? Was that in there?
Briefly, but he didn't say what for. He just kind of shuffled it toward the answer of him going by the alias.
Yeah.
But it really wasn't an alias. It was, he had included his middle initial.
Yeah.
And then we just, like we talked about, this was the days when you could travel the border with your phone, your driver's license or a birth certificate. You didn't necessarily have to have a passport.
Yeah. And Stan had the weird situation that he was an American citizen, but he was living in Canada. So he had that dual. He actually held 2 passports. He told me that when he went the American side, he would show his American passport, and when he came back to Canada, he would show his Canadian passport, which made it very easy to go back and forth across the border. He's a dual citizen. And but Doty, I think he had mentioned, may have been in my interview, but he mentioned that he figured that Stan may have, they were looking at whether they were going to arrest him. He claimed that he knew what was behind, because a lot of the Stan FBI file is pulled. There's sections, and in fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take one of the documents. Stan used to love showing the documents of how he said there's no UFO cover-up, and then he would show the NSA document where it's completely blacked out except for 2 words. Well, Stan's FBI file had a couple of those pages where there was nothing, and so the next time I go back to Fredericton, I've asked them, and they basically told me, give me an idea where the grave is, and I'm going to go to the grave and I'm going to pin it to his gravestone. Why? Because he'd be so happy to see that he actually had a document about himself that was totally blacked out that proved that it was a UFO cover-up, as he said. So he loved that kind of stuff. He liked to show it, because they always claimed there was no UFO cover. And he said, what do you mean there's no UFO cover? Look at this. And show all.
Well, that's part of, like I said, talking with various people about Stanton. That's one thing that people keep bringing up to me over and over again, is this sense of humor that he had. Like this, he seems so serious, and he takes ufology very serious, but then to just know that he had such a great personality and could joke around and had these quips going back and forth with people, it's nice.
Yeah. In fact, the thing I think, and Stan would take credit for this, is that if you look at the when they pull stuff from documents now, when they black it out, they don't black it out anymore. And that was because Stan made such a big deal out of it. Now they white it out because it doesn't look as bad. And that was, he would show the black, and it was the whole page would be black. They'd black the whole thing out. And they actually changed, I think they changed the policy based on Stanton Friedman. It was so embarrassing to the government for Stan to be holding up these documents all the time that had all this black on it. So they started using whiteout. This is an NSA document where Stan is filing with the NSA, and he went to all the different agencies. He was getting inside stuff from Bill Moore, from various sources, and just using common sense as to who would be holding the cover-up documents. And he went through all this kind of stuff. So we're going to find a lot more of this stuff in his files, all sorts of Freedom of Information Act requests and documents that he got from various agencies. This is the letter that he sent out, and you can see that he's very specific. He's asking for very specific documents, and that's the whole thing behind doing an FOIA, that you got to be very specific in your your FOI. Don't string a bunch together. That's where I went, like for the Hillary Clinton thing. I'd say I want all the photographs from Hillary Clinton at the Rockefeller Ranch. Then another one, I want all the photographs of Bill Clinton at the Rockefeller Ranch. I want all correspondence. And another FOI, I want all the correspondence between Lawrence Rockefeller and Bill Clinton. Another FOI, I want all the correspondence between the president. And you do all that stuff, and you put all these things and be very specific, because if you're not specific, they're going to walk around your request and claim it's too general and we can't find it. It's going to take too long to find and stuff. So be very specific when you're doing an FOI as to what you want. And a lot of times what the FOI, and Stan showed this is a letter from the CIA. CIA never put their letterhead on it. It was always, but John Wright was always the guy that signed the letter, and they would never have anything on the, just like a blank letter that would come into your mailbox with your name on it, because they never wanted to identify it was coming from the CIA. And you can see the letter here has no CIA on it, but it is from the CIA.
Right.
And they're basically demanding costs. So a lot of the things that they would used to do, and they probably still do it, is they would say that we get to charge fees. If you're not a reporter or something like that, you have to pay for search fees. And so the CIA would send you a bill for $5,000 search fee. We'll look for it, but it's going to be, we estimate it's going to be $5,000. As soon as you send us the $5,000 check, we'll start looking. And then, of course, then they won't find anything. So here's one for $40, a pretty cheap thing. And I think Stan paid for this. So the CIA is demanding $40 for or they're getting the receipt here. Their gut Stan's $40 for a request that he had. Now, Stan, as people know, was big into the Roswell crash. He'd written books on it. He'd lectured repeatedly about this. And so, of course, when you're in the Stanton Friedman Files, you want to try to find the Roswell stuff. How many people talked to him about Roswell? Who were his secret sources? Who was he talking to and stuff like that? So we got some more of this, and this will be scattered through all the different presentations that Nicole and I do, because it's not all in one place. It hasn't been sorted. These poor people have no idea how to sort this stuff. So every time we go there, we'll find some more documents in other piles that they're going through. This is a letter that he got from Europe, from a researcher in Europe. And this guy has a source connected to Roswell, and there's bodies and crafts. He's got this source, and he contacts Stanton, because Stanton's the FBI guy, or the Roswell guy. And he says to come to the point. And he talks about, I mentioned Tom Adams. Now, Tom Adams was one of the first cattle mutilation guys in the United States. That I am in contact with a scientist, and he sort of mentions his degrees, who claims to have seen alien wreckage in bodies. So, of course, he's letting Stan know, I've got a source. I've got this guy. And then he said, I talked to Tom Adams about it. And Tom Adams, I'm glad he sent you a copy of the letter. So, of course, he whets Stan's appetite towards this thing. And he's basically saying, the only problem in the moment is I'm not yet free to release or publish the information that I received from him. So he basically says, I can't tell you who the guy is, Stan, and I can't tell you what he's told me, but I'm willing to get you in the loop, and you've got to keep this secret. And this is what you're looking for when you go to an archives, is you're looking for this kind of stuff where Stan makes a deal with somebody, and now you've got all the names, you've got all the letters, and you know exactly who wrote and what the material is. So Stan makes this deal. You see, he writes back here, and he says, in short, I would like to help in confidence. He puts it in big, capital letters. I would not approach Mr. X. Can you tell me the location of the Nassau building and the other scraps of data? So he's digging and scratching from this guy. What's the guy's name, his education, his age? Do you know where he is now? So Stanton's trying to get as much material as he can. And he basically says, there's a lot of frauds out there, like, Guy Kirkwood and Bob Lazar. These guys are all, scam artists. And your guy may be a scam artist as well. We got to check this guy out. And this is the kind of stuff that is so fascinating when you get there, where you see Stan making deals with people and these secret sources coming in with material on Roswell. And as I said, we've only scratched the surface of the documents that we will find in there from people who approached Stanton Friedman on the Roswell crash. There's a lot of cartoons, and Stan collected all this kind of stuff. So here's a couple just to put you in the mood of Roswell, some of the Roswell cartoons. And they even had one for a near-death experience, which I thought was pretty funny here, where he's got a near-death experience cartoon, because I do a lot of this as well, research. And he said, we haven't got all day, buddy. Is it in the body, or do we pronounce you dead? And the guy's up floating around in the corner of the room. So Stan had a lot of these cartoons, and I have a huge cartoon collection. I have probably 1,200 UFO cartoons, and I don't publish them because people seem to get very upset when I publish them. Everybody gets offended. So I will send them to the archives at the University of Manitoba, and they will deal with what they're going to do with them. But so here Stan wrote a lot of articles, and he's into the pieces. He had some pieces that he was looking at, and here's one of the pieces that he received. And this shows you that the archives really doesn't know what they're doing, and it's not their fault. I mean, so they get this letter. Stan gets a letter, and it says, "Dear Stan, this is the Roswell fragment that I told you about." So some guy came to Stan after a lecture and said, "I've got a piece of the Roswell crash." And of course, Stan said, "Great, send it to me and I'll get it analyzed." So the guy sends it, and it's in a little baggie, and it's taped to the letter, and the archivist just puts it in a one of the file boxes in a file folder. So I see this, and I went to the archivist and I said, "You need to protect this. I mean, if this is a piece of the craft, if people know this is here, someone's going to walk into the archives and they're going to try to grab it. They're going to try to get it, whether it's the government trying to cover it up or whether it's someone just wanting this piece of the Roswell crash." And so now they've made a new rule that in order to see this piece, if you go to the Stanton Friedman collection, you have to have an archivist with you when you look at this particular letter. Whereas I could have stuck it in my pocket. They had no idea. I mean, I could have walked off of this piece. And so I've told them that they're in control, and I'm sure there's probably going to be a request from somebody for an analysis of this piece. And so when that comes, I've said to them, I'll help them negotiate as to making sure that they keep control of this fragment, and because there's going to be a lot of people who are going to want to analyze this piece of metal, and I'm sure there's going to be other pieces of metal that Stan has got in the collection, but we haven't seen them yet.
Right. And everybody kind of asks about these pieces of metal, or maybe they think that there's only a few of them out there. But when you really start digging, you know, like just off the top of my head, we know Linda Moulton Howell has several pieces, and she sold a piece to TTSA.
Yeah.
Jacques Vallée has a piece or several pieces that he's had tested. And now here Stanton's had one in his files for a couple decades, just sitting in a baggie.
He was waiting for someone to
analyze material right here.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. That's the thing is that people don't realize is that you're going to find this kind of stuff because Stan just didn't have time to analyze everything or to investigate everything.
Right.
And everybody's got a lot of these secret stories that they've written down. It's in their files. And when they die, then everybody finds out what all the secret stories were. I've even got three pieces of metal. I've got the one from the gifting field where you hear the American Cosmic, the book American Cosmic with Tyler D and Diane Pasolka and James. When they go to the gifting field, it was my friend that took Tyler D, I believe, there the first time. So I've got a piece from that field, and I've got two other pieces. There's a lot of this stuff floating around, and it's very expensive to analyze. TTSA is doing some analysis, and Jacques Vallée is probably the foremost authority. Jacques Vallée sort of got upset that TTSA was making a big deal out of this, that they had discovered analyzing UFO pieces of metal. He said, "We've been doing this for 40 years. I mean, he had this piece from Brazil. They have all sorts of pieces from the 1950s. And in fact, I was approached for the Canadian material. The Canadians had material in the 1950s as well. And I've got all the Canadian files from Wilbert Brockhouse-Smith, who ran the program. I've got all his private files. And there was a lot of material. There was, I don't know, maybe 100 pages of files on the Canadian material, of the crash material that the Canadians had.
Well, and I guess the big deal is, yes, they have been running these pieces over the decades, but now the technology with reading the isotopes and the elements, they can take that even deeper than what it was 15 years ago. They just couldn't scan as in depth, I guess, and now they can get better readings off what it actually is or isn't.
Yeah, and then that's the thing. But it's so expensive. Like Jacques Vallée's got the connection in Silicon Valley, where he's helped, you know, get these machines off the ground and stuff. And so it's good that he's able to do it, because as I was telling you before, you heard the story that I'm very much into people with light language. And I went to a university that does spiritual practices, praying, speaking in tongues, channeling, mediumship, and all this kind of stuff, and puts these people in MRI machines, and they produce these very distinct brain patterns. And now we have these people with light language who are speaking these alien languages, and there's quite a few of them around. I had a panel of these people, and I know a lot of them. And I said to the guy, I went to the lab, wrote to the lab, and I said, you know, you do people who do speaking in tongues and all this kind of stuff. How would you like to do these light language people? I sent him some videos of a woman in Georgia doing light language, and he was fascinated. Yeah, I'd love to do this. And then he sent me gave me the bill, and it was, he estimated $50,000 for 10 people, and plus flying, the cost to fly them to the East Coast and to put them in hotels. So you're talking at least $60,000 to test 10 people, which at this moment I don't have that kind of spare change. So it's very expensive research, and that's why a lot of the stuff you'll see in people's collections really hasn't been analyzed, because who's got the money to do the analysis?
Right. It's all comes down to money. Let's start making T-shirts.
Yeah, recruit the people to finance the whole thing.
For MRIs. I told you I came up with a couple for you.
There you go. Yeah.
Down with dust, up with orbs.
Yeah, yeah, that's the thing, and that's too bad that people have to do that kind of stuff where they're, you know, trying to scrape money together to do research, because the scientific community is not interested in doing it. They're doing their own little nuts and bolts things with drugs and stuff like that, or this is leading edge stuff.
Research across the board. I mean, you've written several books.
Yeah.
You turn your book money right back into your research and what you're working on. Like, I know Jim Peniston's book 1, all of what he's made off book 1, his portion, he's turning right back into book 2 and funding the research sites of going to the locations. So nobody ever gets to keep all their hard work money. They turn it around into more hard work.
Yeah, there's a joke that's told. If you're a UFO researcher and you win $1 million in the lottery, what do? Just keep researching until the money's gone.
Right.
You actually do lose money, because you got to consider, when I go to Stanton, I got to fly across the country. I live in the middle of the country. I got to fly to there, and then you have to get a place to stay, and you're there for 6 days, and then you fly home. Next time I go there, I'll be there for probably 10 or 11 days. And it's expensive doing this kind of research, and you might sell, you know, 200 books or something. That'd be it, because most people don't read books today. And that's why I want to get this stuff. The way we're doing it here is on YouTube, or on where people can access it online, because how many people are going to go to Stanton Friedman's Files? I'm the only one. There's somebody there within an hour who may have gone in there and looked, but he may not even have gone. So a lot of these collections around the world, I've been to a lot of them. You know, even when I was with Desta, people think that there's all these people there researching, and it's like, no, you can go there. And I showed Desta, look at the sign-in book here, and there hadn't been anybody in the archives for like 4 days or something. I mean, yeah, people don't have the money and they're not interested. They want it on quick and easy. So you do the YouTube thing and you put it out. And I guess that's your job. And my job is to get it out through something that people will tune into and get the message. Here's a document. Again, this has got to do with the Roswell thing. And again, it's just a piece of a letter that I found there where he's talking about Kevin Randall. And Kevin Randall had written a book on Roswell with Don Schmidt in the early 1990s. And this is written by James Mosley. He was a real funny guy. He was a skeptic, but he was pretty humorous guy, grumpy old guy, but had a real good sense of humor, liked to joke around and stuff like that. So he's writing to Friedman. This is 1993, about 2 years after Randall and Schmidt come out with the book. And he said, Kevin Randall, who appeared at the UFO conference in New Jersey recently, where I also spoke, tells me and others that at this point he has seen a piece of Roswell fragment, but does not have one. So again, you get these things, these rumors, and you find these in these letters. Who had pieces of fragments? what did they do? Now, we haven't tracked this back, but you find this stuff in these files of different people. And then another one where this is in the same letter with Mosley, and I did this in an earlier PowerPoint on Stan Friedman. This is one of the biggest cases. I knew Stan was involved in this case. This is the case with the Cuban MiG, the MiG-21, or I think it was. And the story, Stan got involved with this, and we sort of know, I know who the source was, because we found the document as to the source. So Stan gets contacted that U.S. intelligence, Navy people, surveying audio frequencies in Florida, picked up a scramble of 2 jets, Cuban jets. UFOs coming into Cuba over the water, and these 2 jets are scrambled. They demand that the UFO land, all this kind of stuff. They give it fair warning, and this is all being monitored by U.S. communications intelligence and being taped. And at that moment, they lock on. They give an order to shoot down the UFO. The one in the front, it locks onto the UFO to shoot it down. And what the U.S. intelligence picks up in the background is the guy screaming, "It's gone! It's gone!" The plane just disintegrates, and they pick this all up. It's all taped on by U.S. intelligence. And Stan got involved with this. So in this letter here, Stan is again talking about being involved in this case. And basically what happens is there's an NSA listing post in Florida, and this guy contacts Stan. Stan passes it on to Bob Pratt, who was the National Enquirer reporter at the time, who had unlimited amounts of money and was chasing all sorts of UFO stories. He gave it to Bob Todd, who makes a lot of FOA requests, and Todd didn't get anything, so he sort of threatened the intelligence people. If I don't get anything in response on this Cuban jet story, I'm going to the Cubans. And the same afternoon, 2 FBI guys showed up at his door and scared the living daylights out of him. And so everybody knew this was a live story. This is a real story. This actually happened. So this is one of the things that I'm looking for. And I knew it was there. I knew Stan was involved. So as soon as I got there, that was the first thing I looked for. I looked in the index, and they will produce an index, and that was in there, the Cuban case. And I immediately went to the Cuban case, and I immediately started photographing all the documents in the Cuban case. And I now know who his source was. The only thing I'm missing now, and I've asked them, they haven't found it yet, was Stan taped an awful lot of his phone calls. People don't know this. And so he talks to this guy. They're going back and forth with letters. There's no email at the time. Going back with snail mail. And it looks like Stan phoned the guy. So there may be a tape of a conversation between Stan and the guy who is the guy inside the intelligence community who told the story about what happened on that tape. So that's the kind of stuff you find, this real interesting stuff in archives but you may have to sort it together. You may have to put all pieces from various files and put the story together. Okay.
Did you see a box of cassettes, or is that something you would ask the archivist about?
They have a special archivist. They have an audiovisual archivist, and she was off on holidays when I was there. And then I talked to her. They're processing, and they showed me some of the boxes. Stan had collected everything. So they showed me a tape from the 1960s of a Merv Griffin show. And this is like an old tape that's on you would need, I don't even know what kind of machine to play this thing on. Like way before VHS tapes, these huge tapes of video from 1960s and 70s. So Stan had all that stuff. And he would have all these audio tapes of various comments. In fact, I did release one, which was the famous phone call he made with Robert Sarbacher, who was the guy who met with the Canadians in 1950 and told the Canadians that there was a crash flying saucer in the United States. Stan tracked him down and said, "Were you the guy that met in the Canadian embassy?" And he said, "Yeah, I was the guy." And he asked him, "Well, why did they classify it? Where was the briefing?" And this phone conversation was about 15 minutes, where Robert Sarbacher says there was a briefing at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. He couldn't go, and he mentions all these people that went, and Stan says they're all dead. Is there anybody that might be alive? So Stan is going to have a lot of interesting audio tapes, because he knew when he's talking to high-level people he's trying to get to talk, he's taping it just in case they say something that he can use. So that's going to be an interesting thing. That's one of the things I'm going to look at when I get back there. But they have a special audiovisual archivist who does just audiovisual. So it'll be a special part of the collection that I'll see when I go back there, whenever they open the archives. This is one thing that I'll point out in this lecture is Stan was famous for the MJ-12 document, but what people don't realize in the UFO community, because everybody's sort of into the story as it is today, they don't realize the history of stuff, that when the MJ-12 document came out, there was all sorts of stuff being leaked. And majority of it was going through a guy by the name of Tim Cooper. And he was in a book with Richard Doty. Richard Doty writes a book with Robert Collins. Now, Richard Doty was the Falcon in the Avery. Robert Collins was the Condor. He was the scientific guy. He was a physicist at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. They wrote a book called Exempt from Disclosure. I highly recommend you read it. If you want to know about UFO cover-up, these guys were on the inside of what was going on, where they were going to brief Bush in 1991. They were going to do disclosure, what happened, why it was called off. These are the inside guys that were feeding Bill Moore. These are government guys. Richard Doty puts a lot of stuff in the book, and they tell all these incredible stories. And Tim Good was an advisor to this book. So what happens is the MJ-12 document is leaked, and then they start leaking documents in mass. Most people don't realize there was 3,700 pages of UFO documents leaked in the late 80s and early 90s. A lot of it came from Tim Cooper. He would file an FOIA with the CIA. He would get an envelope back from the CIA full of documents. Stan was the first guy to be contacted by Tim Good. So he wants to know what to do with these documents. He's not a document guy, so he goes to Stan. So he writes this letter to Stan Friedman, and he said, I'm getting all these documents, whatever. And Stan writes back and says, you know, thank you for the documents and all this kind of stuff. Now, what actually happens later on, I'm just showing you how this thing started out, but Stan basically says, no, these documents are all fake. They're all bad documents. My documents are real. These documents are all fake. When in fact, I would say they're all the same thing. They're documents that have been altered. Stan's documents, these documents, that's how they get the story out. But most people don't realize there was 3,700 pages of documents that were leaked into the UFO community. And so that doesn't, a lot of people were accusing Richard Doty. That's not Richard Doty. Richard Doty cannot produce 3,700 pages of documents in his basement while he's working a full-time job. This is an agency putting out documents for a particular reason. And what they do is they tell all sorts of inside stories about who was involved, how it all worked, and yet it has plausible deniability because every time you check, there's a spelling mistake, the heading is moved, there's no date on it, there's all these different problems. So they alter a document. But Stan was the first guy that Tim Cooper went to. And when you look at the history of this thing, if you look at the ATIP, when the ATIP thing came, there was 2,200 or 2,500 FOIAs filed on the ATIP thing. Everybody filed for ATIP. They want to know what's going on, where is it? And of course, Tim Cooper filed, and he used a code name in his ATIP. So he only filed a couple of years ago. So Tim Cooper is still in the game. You don't know who Tim Cooper is, but he's still in the game. He's still filing FOIAs. He was accused of hoaxing all these documents. He was the guy behind them. And yet he's still filing these documents. He didn't hoax these documents. These are coming from agencies inside the US government trying to get something out. And he used a code name, project name, in the FOIA document. I can't remember what the code name was in the ATIP thing, but Tim Cooper had some inside sources as well, and he's still busy. But Stan was big into documents in the early 1990s, and the documents actually were picked up by Robert and Ryan, his son Ryan Wood, and they produced, it's a website, it may still be up, called New MJ-12 Documents, and they did analysis and all that stuff. It is?
I came across them a couple weeks ago. I was having a conversation with an MJ-12 researcher, and we discussed them at length.
Yeah, they spent a lot of money. They actually got, I think, $250,000 from Joe Firmich. He's a very controversial figure, but Joe Firmich had an awful lot of money, and he threw it into the UFO community in anti-gravity stuff, and he put up $250,000 to have those 3,700 pages of documents analyzed, and then a documentary made on those. And Robert and Ryan Wood did that documentary, so they received this money from Joe Firmich. Stan Friedman was involved in a famous story. And again, if you're new to the field, you don't really know all these backstories. 1988, there was a major UFO documentary that came out. It's not like today where there's, 45 UFO shows. There was like 2 documentaries a year, maybe 1 documentary every 2 years. There was no documentaries. This was the big one. It was in the last days of the Reagan administration. I was dealing with Billy Cox at the time. We were really excited about this. There was rumors that Ronald Reagan was going to do disclosure. He was going to come on UFO Cover Up Live with the live alien, and it was all going to be over, and they were going to tell us the story. So everybody was excited when this thing came up. And this is, Stan was involved in this. So I find a whole file on the UFO cover-up and Stan's inside story on what he thought was going on, how badly it was run. He didn't get paid properly. There was he was very upset about how this thing, and a lot of people complained about UFO Cover-Up Live because it was very scripted. And it was very scripted because the CIA was running it. It was a CIA operation. The Falcon, the real Falcon was sitting in the audience. That's why they were reading off cue cards. They didn't want you saying something. They wanted you to say exactly what they wanted you to say. And all the people complained. Stan complained. Everybody was complaining. They were forced to read off these cue cards telling their story.
You can kind of see it on everybody's faces as they're sitting there. You can find UFO Cover-Up on YouTube, I believe, the in its entirety now. But everybody just looks so grumpy.
In fact, Bob Emenegger told the joke. Bob Emenegger was the guy that did UFOs Past, Present, and Future, and had the whole story of the Holloman Base, so I won't get into Holloman Air Force Base film that he was given, and he puts 8 seconds into his documentary. But he was on there talking about the Holloman Air Force Base story, and he had actually Paul Chartle from the security manager who actually had the film and gave it to them from the government. And he said he was reading, and of course he's a comedian guy, so he's sitting there, he's reading off cue cards, and then he's describing how the UFO lands, and the door opens up, and he says, and the UFO landed, and the door opened up, and out came Sasquatch. And the guy goes, no, read what's on the cue card, read what's on the cue card. And he just wanted to go off script, and they were very upset that they were practicing the reading, but everybody was upset about this thing. But it was very scripted, and what you get in that thing, that's when the Avery starts. So this is the Condor and the Falcon. This is Richard Doty. He's backlit in the presentation. They actually go to Albuquerque to interview him. Bob Emenegger saw the tickets. They went to there. And so he got nailed as the Falcon, but he was actually the cover for the Falcon. He was the guy that was in between the Falcon and Bill Moore, so that everybody would think it was Richard Doty. And the Falcon was actually standing in the audience, and I actually asked Bill Moore, I said, was the real Falcon actually in the audience? Because we knew Richard Doty wasn't there. We knew they'd gone to Albuquerque to do the film. So this part of the UFO Cover-Up Live, where Richard Doty's talking in backlit, is actually on a tape. And so he said, I'll just tell you what, Grant. I said, there's 12 guys in the audience, and that's all I'm going to say, which basically confirmed, yeah. And some people said it was Richard Helms from CIA was the actual Falcon. There's various names as to who the Falcon was, but it was somebody pretty high level, because Robert Coleman, who was the Blue Book spokesman at the time in the Pentagon, told Billy Cox, I was there, I could not believe this guy was involved. I know who the Falcon is. And Billy Cox could never get him to say who it was, but it definitely wasn't Richard Doty, because Richard Doty was a low-level guy in the AFOSI, and he was on the other side of the country, and whoever it was very Bill Coleman at the Pentagon was extremely impressed, knew who it was, and said, I cannot believe this guy's involved in UFOs. And some people say it was Richard Helms, the director of the CIA. So here's Stan you can see a much younger Stan in 1988 in the documentary. This is one of the things that Richard Doty talked about, and I think you can correct me if I'm wrong, Nicole. I asked him about this in my recent interview with Richard Doty. This is the story about the crystal, which is, it shows you that there's some validity to these stories, because in 1988, Richard Doty tells the story as the Falcon. The most impressive thing I saw during my time working on UFOs was the crystal, and that the aliens had this crystal, and you could look at this crystal at a certain angle in the light, and you could see 3-dimensional history of the world, and you could see everything that happened in the world back. And one of the stories that was going around at the time, I don't think Richard Doty told, but it was going around at the time, was that they'd actually shown the crucifixion of Jesus in the crystal to the American government. So this was the whole deal. And the reason that's so important in this documentary in 1988 is that it also appears when you go into information about life in the spirit world, Journey of Souls, Michael Newton talks about, he does the 7,000 regressions, takes people to life between lives, and they talk about reading these books. They're looking at their past lives, planning their next lives, and they open up the book, and inside the book is a crystal, and they look at it at a certain angle, and they can see their past lives, and they can plan for their future lives. So these are two things that link these two things together, that the aliens have this technology that's also described in the spirit world. This is my friend Ron Johnson from Utah, and we interviewed him a number of times. He's got a very important story, and he had 36 out-of-body experiences, and 3 of them he goes into the spirit world. The being that he deals with, LB, actually allows him to go in the spirit world. He deals with his dead mother in the spirit world. She takes him to a building in the spirit world, and in that building he describes the fact that it's bigger inside, way bigger, 10 times the size inside the building than it is outside the building, which is exactly what Terry Lovelace said when he was inside the UFO. It was 10 times the size. And Chris Bledsoe said the same thing. It was 10 times the size inside as outside. So you see these crossovers between the UFO world and the spirit world, which makes you wonder, is it a UFO abduction, or are they out of body in the spirit world? And maybe the same thing, and we may be misinterpreting what's actually going on, because it's the same thing. And the other thing was that Ron Johnson said when his mother took him in this building that was 10 times the size inside, at the far end of the building, there was a table with crystals on it, about 40 or 50 crystals. And these crystals were coming out of the table, and everybody had their own crystal. So that when you died, your crystal would be on this table, and you could look at the crystal and you could see your past, you could see all your events of your life. And there was a crystal for his dog, and he tells a story about the crystal for his dog, and he looks at and he then discovered, after looking in the crystal, what happened to his dog, because his dog just disappeared one day, and he looks in the crystal and finds out that his neighbor had shot the dog. So this is a story that when you see this and you hear Ron Johnson telling the story, you say that's the same story they told in UFO Cover Up Live. There's a crossover between the spirit world and the alien world, and whether it's
Did Ron describe those crystals on the table? Because I think that's what was standing out to me with your latest interview with Mr. Doty, is that Rick described the crystals as being kind of rectangular with nodules on each end, which doesn't really look like the rendition from Live 88, but it's still that same line of similarity. And I think he mentioned that they were a sort of power source as well, the crystals, or that they had found out that they are also a power source.
Well, what I'll do is I'll get Ron Johnson. He's a good artist. He's an extremely good artist. I'll get him to draw it, because he's doing his book now.
Oh, that would be great.
He has that, and he has symbols. He has all sorts of stuff that I've asked him to sort of draw. And
we should ask Rick Doty to draw his crystals as well, to see if they look similar.
Yeah, good idea. He's probably going to hear this, so he knows we need him to draw it.
Hey Rick, pretty please.
Here's Phil Klass. This is interesting, and I always talk about skeptics, that people sort of, they go up against skeptics, and basically in the end you're not going to convince any skeptic of anything. I'd say it's left brain interpreter. It's part of the left brain, called the left brain interpreter. That's where skepticism comes from, and it's just guessing. It's making up stuff. And the left brain is made to do it when the world becomes inconsistent. This part of the left brain just makes up something to make the world consistent. So it reestablishes the old worldview. It says, oh, it's okay. It's not something out of the ordinary. It's just, it was just a bird. It was just a kite. And then everybody feels better. So this is a part. It's called the left brain interpreters in the left brain. And what they found out when the research was done with the split brain people in the Nobel Prize winning lab in the 70s and 80s, is that once you made a decision, once the left brain made up a story about something, it never backed off the story. It would just defend the story. And so what you have with Stan is he spent many years and many fights with various skeptics like the great Randy, Phil Klass, Menzel, Sagan, Oberg, piles of guys. And he never convinced anybody of anything. They just would get more hardline, and he would get more hardline. They'd back into their corners. and nobody convinced anything. But the big guy he always argued with was Phil Klass. And there's a lot of material. And there's this kind of funny, we were going to, I had it, an audio clip, but I'll have to play it on another one, but I'll just describe you what was the audio clip. So here's Phil Klass stirring up trouble. He would always like to stir up trouble. And he's talking, this is a 1974 letter that he writes that I found in Stan's files. And this is this idea that I've said numerous times, that the government is doing gradual disclosure. This is exactly what Phil Klass says in 1974, that Donald Kehoe, who was the head of NICAP, the biggest UFO group at the time, is running around and he's saying that there's going to be major disclosure in 1974 and 1975, that they're going to drop UFO films. The U.S. Air Force plans to produce films or UFOs in 1975 and 1976 as well. Well, one of the big documentaries that came out at that time was Bob Emenegger's UFOs, Past, Present, and Future. In 1977-78, Bill Coleman, the guy that I mentioned that was a UFO Cover-Up Live, the guy who was the spokesman for Blue Book for the Pentagon, ran a show called Project Blue Book, 1978, 77, 78, 79, or 77, 78, right at this time period, where they did UFO cases. And they would do this thing, they would say, oh, it's a great case, and they would describe the case, and then in the end, they would debunk the case. So for 2 years, they were putting out these UFO cases, and I say it's the same thing. That was U.S. Air Force. That was Bill Coleman putting this out. He was formerly U.S. Air Force guy, and he was in charge of this show. So Phil Klass is reporting, he's writing out these guys to the Pentagon, to this Captain Parker at the Pentagon, and he's saying, you can have this information for free. I mean, are you going to do something about these guys? They're making these claims, these wild charges, he calls them, about the UFO cover-up on UFOs. And I hope you're disturbed about this. And he's trying to crank them up to go and arrest these people because they're claiming that there's a cover-up and stuff like that. And the reason that's sort of funny is that here's the letter, and then this is Joanna, who's the woman in charge of the archives collection. And I had an audio which I didn't link properly, but she's talking, and as I said when we started, is that she really doesn't know what to do. She doesn't know how to file this stuff. She doesn't know who the names are. So she's saying to me, well, we got these names, and there's all these piles of paper with all these different names and stuff. And she says, you know, how do you want me to do this? What are the big subjects? So I'm saying, okay, there's Phil Klass, there's Oberg, there's all these skeptics that he fought with. You got to have those guys separated, put files for them. You got to have separate files for alien autopsy, UFO Cover-Up Live, Roswell, Area 51. And then I say, and I'm saying the skeptic guys, I said, and you gotta have one for Phil Klass. And she says, oh yeah, we know him already. We know who that guy is. Because there was so much correspondence that the archivists, they had already, that was their first lesson in ufology. They knew who Phil Klass was. Because there was just
that he's kind of an oddity as well, because you can look at these group of skeptics that you just mentioned, and most of them you can stand behind their point of view. They're civil, they're giving out their points of view, and whoever they're arguing with, whether it's Stanton or somebody else, you can see that intellectual drive back and forth. But not with Philip No Klass here. He like took skepticism to that honoring personal level instead of keeping it, what do they call it in boxing, above the belt?
Yeah, they would jab at each other. Some of it was actually pretty funny. I mean, in terms of, because they would fight back and forth, but it was you were being very sort of, you wouldn't be very dirty, but you would be very sort of good quips and jokes and stuff like that, and sort of be very just to show how smart you were, how you could attack the other guy and stuff. So some of it was pretty funny to read, and the archivists were sort of picking up on this. But Klass was the main guy that Stan would have debates against him, and he had debates against all sorts of people, Michael Shermer and people that he would debate with, but he never convinced anybody. And that's because left brain interpreter it's what keeps the world consistent. It's when you see a UFO and you don't believe there are UFOs or something, it says no, these people are just making up, it's a kite or whatever, and it makes you feel better. And once people make those decisions, they very rarely change. So despite all the work that Stan did, he didn't convince anybody of anybody, but he did sort of get the information out to the general public. And that's it for our presentation tonight. Any final comments? And Nicole, let me stop the share screen here.
No, I don't have any final comments. I did take some more notes, just endless hunting, you know, like you said, names and conversations and stealth bombers and cartoons. It's just, you never know what you're going to come across.
Well, you got your work cut out for you. You got the look through the couple days that you've got and find stuff and stick it all in a file, and we'll do another presentation and try to get the story out to people. And then when the Obama thing comes, you can maybe grab somebody from Illinois, and we'll get together on a team. If you can put a team together, we'll do the FOIAs, and we'll share them, because it's digitally, you can share it pretty fast. And we can even do the links if you have a file, because that's what I did with you. I have all the files in one spot where I can just share all 6,000 pages with one click, and you can go in there. So we'll probably do the same thing with the Obama thing, where you'll set up a OneDrive file where people can access the file. It's a matter of sorting it together so that people can go and find what they want to file and find, because these archives aren't going to do it. The one in New Brunswick is not going to do the Stanton Friedman. They say, this is not our deal. We've done this for the UFO community, spent all this money to, and they even had the problem was, not only did the archives not do UFO material, but Stan was not a Canadian. He was not a Canadian. He was not born in New Brunswick. So they were saying, why should we do the files from some guy who was an American? But he was so famous in New Brunswick, in that city, that the archives actually went through this fantastic expense. So I want to thank you, Nicole, for joining me here. And we'll catch you in the next segment here, which I guess will be segment 11. We'll do that. We'll get some documents together, and let's do this again.
Woohoo! Anytime. Thank you, Grant.
Again, thank everybody for joining us. And if you have any questions, send them. And if you want to help sort stuff or do stuff for us, let us know, because it's a pretty big collection. It's, as we said, 15 pallets that'll take 4 years to put together. It's a massive collection, and we could
4 years.
There you go. Okay.
All right. Thank you, Grant. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.